If ever there was a child of this city, it was my brother. And as you wander around and look through this fabulous pictorial collage of Jack's life, he was the quintessential Baghdad by the Bay resident.
Basically, my interest in art came out of the theater. I was I had a leading role in my 5th grade play that was written by my teacher, who was a part-time magician and playwright, and he wrote a melodrama, and I played Horsebread the hero in the melodrama. My second part was in the 6th grade for my for Miss Wilcoxon, where we recreated the day in a life of a Navajo tribe. And we went from early dawn to the end of the day at Kenilworth Grammar School. And I worked, this is in Phoenix, Arizona, which had a much more interesting educational system than schools do now. We actually learned Spanish in our school. And we learned a lot about the different native groups that that had contributed to the development of the Salt River Valley, the tribes that had developed agriculture and what their particular products were. And so, I sort of got an understanding of that from the early days. Anyway, Barry Caney and I put together a saltwater dimmer to make the sun rise and the sun set. This was my first techie job. We did it with a big crock, pottery crock, and 2 coffee can lids, and you put one wire of a light bulb to one of the coffee can lids down at the bottom and one on the top with a piece of string on it, and you would lower it down through a salt solution, and as the 2 coffee can lids got closer together, more and more electricity would pass, and the light bulb that you had hooked up to this would get brighter and brighter and brighter. It's a saltwater dimmer. There was a little flash when they finally touched, which was, of course, the great moment of the dawn. But, and I played the medicine man who made the light, and I learned a lot of Navajo chants. And, how to say hello in Navajo, Yatahe, Shidone Agosha. Which was sort of an interesting background, 5th or 6th grade. I also did a bunch of art. I was, sort of into that, and did some singing in front of the school. So I got into performing.
It was a great place to grow up. My dad was a partner in a law firm there, and he eventually became a federal judge, and that was Jack's dad. It was a pretty white shirt and skinny tie family, not very much what you would expect for something that would bring us Jack Davis. But that was our childhood.
And when Jack was interested in knowing about the family tree, my father was able to inquire about Senator Hayden whether he could do research at in Washington at the Library of Congress. So, quote, Uncle Carl had one of his staff people bring us the genealogy of our family. So the Davis family in that genealogy can be traced back to Wales. And the first Davis came over on the good ship Vine in the early days, and then it comes down the line. On the other side we have Ostermans and we have Leonards, so we have Irish and German and Welsh and English.
We moved at one point from a house in downtown Phoenix, a pretty modest house, to a place on the edge of the Arizona Country Club. A beautiful home on the 17th fairway, and that's a little important because I'm going to tell you a story very quickly about Jack growing up. Those of you who know Jack, he had a thing about cars. It wasn't that he liked fancy cars, but he was always tinkering with cars. He was always hot wiring cars and making cars a part of his life. And because there was an 11-year difference, I am now about maybe 5 or 6 years old. Jack's just at 16, 15 years old, and he gets his first car. And he and his dear buddy, Chauvin Emmons, work on this car for weeks and weeks to get it running. They finally get it running, but they, of course, don't have any driver's licenses. And so what are they going to do with this car? Well, they look right and they look left, and this was a terrible car. This was a Renault Dauphine, and it is actually literally known as one of the 50 worst cars ever created. It was such a horrible scandal of car that if you stood beside it, you could actually hear it rusting. This thing was actually so horrible, but they got it to run, but they looked around and they said, okay, so where are we going to take out our first car, our important car? We're kids, we want to drive. And they looked over the berm, and there was the golf course. And sure enough, Jack and Chauvin get the Renault started, and they go zooming out on the golf course. Well, nobody knew about this. It was about 5 or 6 o'clock at night. The next thing we know, there is a phone call. And Dad comes in with a glower like you wouldn't believe. These two young boys, Jack and Chauvin, have taken the Renault and they have scored tracks up and down the fairway of the golf course and over the greens.
When I met him, he drove an old Corvair. That's what we drove to Phoenix and back. He said, well, what kind of car do you want? I said, what do you mean, what kind of car do I want? Yeah, what kind of car do you want? I said, well, what kind of car can I get? He said, what kind of car do you want? I said, well, I've always liked those old Jaguars. So I said, okay. And we found a pale yellow 1958 Jaguar 4-door with red leather interior. And that was my car. And we got 2 dogs, Hector and Bowie. Put them in the back seat. I remember the first night we had smoked a little pot, and we got in there, and just the dash and the gleaming things, we thought we were in a spaceship driving it. But that was a fun car.
Jack had a wonderful childhood, but at some point he's ready to move on. And of course, most of you who know his history know that he moved off. He was Jesuit educated. He was at Brophy in Phoenix for a long time, then he moved off to Santa Clara. He had a pretty, those of you who talk to Jack a lot know that he had a keen intellectual sense. And I think the Jesuits built some of that into them. It was a tough education for him, and that stood him well in the rest of his life.
And when I was in college, I kept doing performing stuff, and finally decided, to do acting. And some friends of mine and I started a theater down in Southern California. It's now called South Coast Repertory, and it's a very substantial repertory theater. It's down in Southern California, down in Orange County, Costa Mesa, Santa Ana, down there. And it's a extremely successful repertory theater.
Jack was born old. From the time I first knew him when we were students together in the drama department of San Francisco State in 1961, Jack was a sage. He always had an air of authority, of leadership. He read constantly, he was always reading several books at once, and he had a huge amount of knowledge about everything. He also knew how to get things done. He had had years of Jesuit training while growing up, and he had already, without possibly even knowing it, committed himself to a life of service. He threw the best parties of anyone in college. Jack lived in a house with some other people not too far from the San Francisco State campus, and after the shows, we all went to Jack's. Not like the play, we all went to Rick's. We all went to Jack's. Jack always had presence, but it wasn't until he grew a beard for his first role on campus as the lead in Waltz of the Toreadors at San Francisco State that he established his physical persona. He had a beard for the rest of his life. In 1963, Jack and a group of San Francisco State students went south to Long Beach to do a summer of theater in a tiny community playhouse 2 blocks from the Pike, a seedy amusement park that was then on its last legs. Jack built all the sets, and he played all the leads. After that summer, a handful of us from San Francisco decided to stay on and form a permanent theater a few miles south in Orange County. That theater became South Coast Repertory, and in 1989, SCR was awarded the Tony Award for Excellence in American Theater, and Time magazine listed us as one of the 5 best theaters in the United States. Today, SCR has a theater complex across from the Orange County Performing Arts Center and employs hundreds of actors, designers, directors, and other theater craftspeople each year with a full-time staff of almost 100, and none of this, I am convinced, would have been possible without John Arthur Davis. Theater is delicate, it is tenuous, it is fragile. It took us well over 10 years to establish any kind of economic base in Orange County, and during those 10 years, Jack was a major factor in keeping us going. How? He built all the sets, and he played all the leads. He built mazes and organized interactive theater and unstructured theatrical events just to see where they would go. About this time, he met the beautiful Judy Davis, and the two of them became the reigning hippie couple of Orange County. For a long time, let's face it, they were the only hippie couple in Orange County.
Yeah. Okay. That's our wedding certificate. I met Jack when he was at South Coast Repertory, and I would work next door at a record store, and I would walk by every day and see this very interesting man, bearded, having his lunch in the lobby of South Coast Repertory, and I went to see Macbeth with Jack playing Macbeth and Leslie Took playing Lady Macbeth, and it was just knocked me over. I mean, he was so incredible. It was just took your breath away. It was a magnificent man. He was Macbeth. And then after that, we had an after theater get together, and we were together from then on. That it just happened very fast, and 2 weeks later we were married. Well, we got married June 25th, 1968, on the balcony of Sean McKenna's Sanchez Street house overlooking San Francisco. We were married by a young man named Chris Banas, who was a minister of Universal Church of, you could marry people with this little flimsy piece of paper. And we went down to City Hall and got our marriage certificate. And we had all our friends from Southern California came up, and lots of friends from up here. And it was just a very typical hippie wedding. And we had a wonderful time. And then we spent that following week with all our friends from Southern California going around to Clement Street and having piroshkis and just exploring San Francisco. You know, that was our little honeymoon.
As actors, we all have the actor's dream from time to time, and all of you know what I mean. In the dream, you're getting ready to go on, you can't find your script, you don't know your lines, you're not quite sure what you're supposed to be doing. It's the actor's anxiety dream, and we all have it. But the recurring dream that I've had over the years is I'm getting ready to do Waiting for Godot with Jack, and I don't feel anxiety. I look forward to it. I still can't find my script. I'm not sure of the lines, but I know in a short period of time I'm going to be on stage doing Godot with Jack.
And when I came back up here, one of my students, I'd worked at UC Irvine building scenery in their theater, in their department. One of my students had gotten a job at the Neighborhood Arts program, which was just being recreated, and he had the old stage truck that the old crew had left on the panhandle at the end of the last gig, and somebody had pulled all the plugs out of the old stage truck, and I helped Buffalo figure out how to get the truck running. And since then, from that point on, I sort of became the de facto technical person for the Neighborhood Arts program, because Buffalo was a great artist but didn't know much technical stuff.
Then eventually Jack found San Francisco, and we in the family kind of, to a certain degree, gave him up. He never really came back that much other than occasional visits to Phoenix. He became essentially, at his core, a San Franciscan.
He came from a very political family. His great uncle was Carl Hayden, who was a U.S. Senator from Arizona. And his dad was a federal judge in Arizona. You know, they had to be incredibly diplomatic. Jack had just really good diplomatic skills. Very fair. He probably got that from his father, the judge. And, you know, his mother's a wonderful person. She's still living. She's 94. In Phoenix, Scottsdale, living in the same town with Jack's brother Bill and his wife Linda. I imagine, knowing Gene, that whatever Jack did was fine. I mean, because he would not really do anything. He didn't do anything wrong. Maybe a few hijinks when he was a teenager, racing cars out on the desert, things like that.
He was always building things. The other thing that he did, we had a house on a golf course in Phoenix, Arizona, and the next door lot was not yet built on, so there was plenty of dirt. And my brother got his chums, and he was very good chums with other boys who loved to build things. And so they tunneled underneath this dirt an elaborate set of forts. And they scooped out the dirt and brought in 2x4s and put a top on. And I was probably never permitted to go in, except that I always wanted to go in. They were not yet engineers, and so they didn't quite understand that the roofs might cave in. But that's where they used to go in the summer heat to get away from the 110-degree heat in the summertime.
Well, Jack could fix anything. He could sew, he could cook. He was really the jack of all trades. And if people asked him to help put something together, he would put it together. He'd build stages, he could do anything. If your chimney caught on fire, he'd get up there and put it out. Which there was a story about him doing something like that. I remember once we went camping, and in the Sierras somewhere, and it was somebody that was trying to build a little theater in this rustic hotel. So instead of Jack taking a real vacation, he worked on this theater the whole time we were there. I always thought it was hard for Jack to relax, like on a real vacation. I mean, he was a big ball of energy. He needed to be busy. I always tell people that Jack was a perfect example of a Scorpio born in Year of the Dragon, educated by Jesuits. Lone Mountain, was a wonderful environment, creative. Lots of younger kids, really, with a lot of enthusiasm. And then after that, it was a neighborhood arts program. Stephen Goldstein, Renee Yanez, Ernie Rivera, the neighborhood arts people. And that's when Jack really started getting involved in neighborhood arts.
I pretty much stopped performing when I left Southern California. But I was more into organizing and then did the technical stuff. So, we were supporting, a half a dozen different events a weekend, all during the year. It took a fair amount. We bought sound systems and built new stages and all that. We had a small production company that we used the CETA workers to help support them. We also supported the gardener program and, had trucks that would move fertilizer around and, all of these odd little things.
Jack was always doing something for somebody. He could never say no. And he helped people, in so many different ways.
And what happened with me was I did this for a couple of years, then my friend John Williams and I had become quite close friends. John was the director of Intersection in North Beach. And I got on his board of directors, and I was very helpful in terms of steering John toward some of the resources that the city had. And between the two of us, we worked out the deal with the Art Commission to put some money into the facility that we had that belonged to the Methodist Church in North Beach in exchange for allowing the community uses that would fit within the program framework of the neighborhood arts program. They basically were, overlapping. They were the same thing, so it worked out very well for both. But John decided to make a big change in his life and move to Oregon. And the board hired me then to become the executive director. One of my very good friends was Bernice Bing, who was the director here of the South of Market Cultural Center. I was also on her board of directors.
This is 76, 77?
Yeah, around there, around the bicentennial period of time. And I made a deal with Bingo. You come and be on my board of directors and then watch my back. And I'll be on your board of directors and I'll watch your back. And so Bingo and I, who had been good friends for a long time, developed a good working relationship during that period of time, and we helped each other out. And through all of this, I think there was, and still to this day, there exists a spirit of sharing rather than a spirit of competition. Some of the sort of higher end art trips get a little bit snooty about their sharing trip, but on the community-based level, if you have a projector and somebody needs one that you're not using, you'll let them have that projector, because next month you may need their 2 instruments that they have.
But SomArts was much more than just theater. It was a much more broader base for Jack. And apparently, from what I've heard, he was really good at getting grants. Getting money for the arts.
You had to develop a competent managerial profile so that whoever was giving you money would feel comfortable. Now, that wasn't too difficult to do if you were, reasonably methodological, because you're not talking huge amounts of money. You're just talking about, don't forget to write it down in the checkbook. Keep the checkbooks in the same place so you don't have to look for the checkbook. Reconcile your checkbook at the end of every month. And if you did that kind of thing and kept your paper track together, it wasn't, too difficult to compete for funding. But that was a core essential that you had to do. Anyway, I learned that from Tom and from Pauline. So, I was free then to start developing the programming at Intersection, and we did, 3 nights a week of theater, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. On Sundays we had a film program and the first sort of gonzo talent shows. We had untalent contests that Carl Cohen put together. On Tuesday we had poetry readings, and the oldest poetry readings in the country, except for St. Mark's in the Bowery. They were started by Steve Schutzman and Tom Cousson, 2 great guys who were part of the early, the early Artists Foundation of Intersection. Anyway, I ran Intersection for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, which is where I sort of got my experience running nonprofits. My board president was Tom Silk, who was a lawyer and quite knowledgeable, one of the first lawyers who really specialized in nonprofits, a great guy, and we were very, very good friends. The other person who really helped me was a woman named Pauline Prochan. She came out here to start the study center. She was from back in Washington, D.C., and she taught me all I know about keeping track of all the numbers. And she knew it was very important. She learned the numbers at her father's side because he was a bookie, and every night the kids would have to help tote up the thing, and if they made mistakes, Dad would pay.
I knew Jack Davis. We had worked together on lots of projects before, and I knew Jack had been the director of Intersection, and Jack has these abilities to organize. And I had asked him if he would come to our board meetings and become a board member. And Jack agreed, and he did. He came on board as a board member.
Jack just really wanted to help people get what they wanted to do done. And SomArts was really the perfect place for him. He was at Intersection for the Arts for a long time.
So that's what I was doing. I was running Intersection, and Bingo was running SomArts. Unfortunately, Bingo got lupus, and it was a seriously life-altering experience for her, and she made a decision to stop being the director of the program here and move up to the Russian River.
And through the various discussions that took place in reestablishing ourselves, it was suggested that Jack become the executive director, and then I become the board president and Carlos the vice president. And then Jack approached a few other people to come on board as board members. Tom Mazzolini, a board member, David Kennedy, and a few other people. So with this reorganization and Jack in place as executive director, and Jack having a vision, and Jack having contacts and knowledge of all the various organizations, and he knew Carrie Shulman very well, and Carrie knows Jack, and she knows Jack's ability, so she felt very good that Jack had become the executive director of SomArts.
And basically what I said to the board was, what we have to do is develop this facility. It was a gorgeous facility. The Art Commission didn't have enough money to do the upgrades that were necessary in it. We didn't have a huge amount of money, but I thought that we could do it incrementally, a little bit at a time, if we sort of looked ahead and tried to figure out the right plan of attack. And the way we did it was we'd ask the artists who come in, well, what do you need? And we'd do the best we could about getting it for them right then, but we'd also put it on the list of, okay, well now if we improve this, then it's going to be much easier for us to serve the artists and the community people who come in here. And that's basically what I've been doing here ever since. I've really tried to collect an interesting and very, very broad and diverse set of individuals who work in the facility. So there's not a lot of homogeneity in the group. Everybody's got unique things that they bring to the table, unique cultural backgrounds, unique visions as artists.
I actually had the great privilege of meeting Jack Davis on the first day that I arrived in San Francisco in 1975. I formed a dance company called the Wallflower Order Dance Collective in Eugene, and we came down to tour California. And our first stop was the Neighborhood Arts Theater at Laguna and Haight, and guess who the technical director was? It was Jack Davis. And I have some of these posters, if you'd like to see what a poster looks like from 1978 from the Wallflower Order, 1975. And you can see the thing that is still our legacy is that the donation was $1.50, okay? That was our show. So Jack was the gentle giant in the booth. We were nervous wreck, the four of us coming down from Oregon, and he just guided us through the whole process and did all the lights and did all the sound cues, and he sat way up in the back in this little booth, and you know, he's been in and out of my life since 1975, and I'm forever grateful for that. And I'm going to do a little dance that I created in 1975, which I can barely do because it's probably been 35 years, but it's called War of the Flea, which reminds me of Jack. It's about the continued struggle to keep going and keep having your voice heard no matter what the consequences. And the group is an Asian American group called The Grain of Sand.
And the moon will be my lantern, and my heart will find a way to sow the seeds of courage that will blossom in the day, to fashion up a garden so green before they came. Our joy will be the sunshine, and our tears will be the rain. Song of the night, war of the flea, deep inside the jungle you will find me. War of the small, war of the flea, where the strongest bomb is human, who is bursting to be free. And this cave will be my shelter, and the earth will be my bed, and life will be the pillow upon which I lay my head. Death may come tomorrow, and dreams may come tonight, to frighten off the deep, still remain to fight. Song of the night, war of the flea, deep inside the jungle you will find me. War of the small, war of the flea, where the strongest bomb is human, who is bursting to be free.
For me, it was, just an absolutely wonderful thing, because I got exposed to all of these different, cultural environments that I never in the world could have gotten into had not I fallen into this circumstance. So I would end up working with the people from the different communities, meeting their moms and their dads and their aunties and their nephews and their nieces, and eating their lumpia and their chicken and their whatever they had on their spread, listening to their music, plugging in the musicians, setting up the dance show. And it was just an incredible cultural education for me. And I started to realize the value of it fairly early on. because I was exposed to it in this sort of very, very rich day-to-day way.
Hi everybody, I'm Sarah Davis. About 2.5 years ago, my father decided that gyms did not support men of his stature, and that men like him did not need to be in spandex. So over the next several months, every couple of weeks, Jack would come into the house with a new 2x4 with springs and pulley contraption, and this was going to transform his body into the body that he used to know. So, I mean, probably 7 or 8 incarnations, and finally he had come up with the TV gym. Patent pending. The idea was that you sat in front of TV and you were only required to be athletic during commercials. And that it was possible to drink red wine while doing this, which he believed was a healthy thing to do. So Chrissy Kiefer is here to perform a piece that she has done in tribute to the TV gym. Jack also loved to come up to people and show his belly, which we all know never really changed past 1990, and make you touch it and say, look at how firm it is now that I've been using the TV gym.
Actually, I think Sarah should do a little demonstration for us because it was not very easy to master.
But it was. So I think...
Go ahead.
I actually think it's best in profile. I believe that eventually he wanted cue balls that you could all customize for yourself. He believed it was a foot massager as well. The idea was that you rolled your feet and it massaged your feet, those ugly feet he had.
Why needed to be sitting right there next to your television?
And you were watching your TV. The idea was you pulled it as you pushed it, causing resistance in the upper torso. Then when you pulled it back towards you, you pushed on it, causing things that happened in the back that I never was willing to let him explain to me. And then you did it like this. And many a family camping trip, Jack stopped being pleasant where he would go off and do the TV gym for 20 minutes at a time. This is his legacy, and, you know, one day.
Somebody found a record from one of Dad's neighbors when he was about, I guess, 5.
It's the first written story of Jack Davis when he was 5 years old.
Yeah, it's a nice little story. So yeah, I guess I'll just go ahead and read it. Mr. Arthur M. Davis of this city, honored as the new president of the Arizona State Bar, is better known to us as the father of Jack Davis of Kenilworth School. Some years ago, when Jack Davis was 5 years of age, we observed him, with our own eyes, approaching our house with a dill pickle in one hand and a molasses-covered popcorn ball in the other.
5 years old.
These he consumed on our front lawn, one bite by one bite of the other. This he did with the silent, deliberate intensity of a finely tooled machine. Whereupon he proceeded into our residence, moving directly to the kitchen, where he took a large, unopened box of crackers, and with this under his arm, he silently departed, pausing but briefly on the front lawn to try out a pocket knife on our new 50-foot-long hose. It is our belief that at this period in his life, he was manufacturing pocket knives. The last we saw of him, as we were struggling into our clothes, He was entering his own home with our crackers. The Phoenix newspaper article, 1954.
Celebrate the life and grieve the loss of John Arthur Marshall Davis, a remarkably good man.
Jack, what can I say? You went too early. We were still supposed to play, but now you're good where you are, and you live on always. Look at all these people. We're all carrying you. Love you.
Was performing at a street fair with my street act in Tempe, Arizona, right next to Phoenix, and got the pleasure of meeting Jack's mother, who we always called Mommy. That was a wonderful experience. Went to a festival in Key West, Florida. Jack showed up with a friend, and they were sleeping in a sleeping bags in a tent on the beach. Many, many different things.
Cabinets for me in the studio, exactly the way I needed them to store paper and supplies. And when he was building them, it was really wonderful because he was testing how strong they were going to be. And of course, he knows the people of San Francisco very well. And he said, well, you know, I have to test them to make sure they're strong enough because eventually somebody will have sex on them.
Rise up to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May you get 1 foot in heaven before the devil knows you're gone. Here to see you, Jack.
Everybody that knew and loved Jack is we were more than we were by having him.
He had a Zen intelligence. He'd always be at the heart of matters, whatever it was, and just very, very stable influence, stabilizing influence in the group. I never heard him say a bad word about anybody. Just good man, good man.
Jack has touched all of us, and
First time I met Jack, back in 1970, I was performing with the Moog synthesizer. I was the only guy in the world who had a Moog synthesizer that was portable at the time, and I think there were 4 of them, maybe 5 of them in the whole world. And I had several people who were my technicians, and one of them also was a technician at Lone Mountain College. And one day he came to me and he said, "You got to come to Lone Mountain College. You won't believe this guy looks just exactly like you." Now, I had long reddish beard and long blonde hair, and I was wearing bell-bottom trousers and a blue shirt with a little vest and kind of little glasses, you know, hippie. And so I went, okay. So we went up to Lone Mountain and walked into the Wabe. That was the theater at Lone Mountain at the time. And there, on the other side of the Wabe, was this guy who was kind of like a mirror image of me. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and we walked slowly across the dance floor toward each other, and we were both wearing the same outfit. I couldn't believe it. And we met, and that was it. From that point on, we were best buds. Now, he had a few inches on me. I'm only 5'10", he's like 6'1", but we were...
This is one of Vladimir's last lines at the end of Godot. This is for Jack. Was I sleeping while the others suffered? Am I sleeping now? Tomorrow, when I wake or think I do, what shall I say of today? That with Estragon, my friend, at this place until the fall of night, I waited for Godot. But in all that, what truth will there be? Astride of a grave and a difficult birth, down in the hole, lingeringly, the gravedigger puts on the forceps. We have time to grow old. The air is full of our cries, but habit is a great deadener. At me too, someone is looking. At me too, someone is saying, he is sleeping. He knows nothing. Let him sleep on. I can't go on. For Jack, there is no more waiting. But for the
procedures. But it's Richard Rekow, if anybody you know Richard Rekow. And Richard played Iago to Jack's Othello at the South Coast Rep many, many years ago. And he wanted me to let you know these few thoughts. We shared so many great moments on stage in Shakespeare's Othello or Antony and Cleopatra. I was your friend and fellow artist and craftsman. And methinks to spend the time playing together on stage with you alone were better than to own a crown, a scepter, or a...
I met Jack Davis in 1986 and was lucky enough to become one of his neighbors at Mission Creek. At Mission Creek Harbor was where I first got to know Jack. My husband and I got a house there, and we had great times with Jack. He was a wonderful neighbor, as you can well imagine. And after I had, used to work downtown in a public relations firm, and then after I had my kids, I begged Jack to please let me start working at SomArts, please, because I wanted like a more flexible sort of part-time job that would go with like raising little kids. So he so very, very kindly let me start taking on some tasks here at SomArts, and I've been here ever since. And we're really going to miss you, Jack. We really are. You were the glue. You were more than the glue, actually. I think you were the mortar. You were the bricks and the mortar of SomArts, so we'll really miss you.
And through all the years since Jack's become executive director, he has a vision, and he's developed the organization and the cultural center. And till this date, it's...
I'd also like to do the big thank you to SomArts. Without the cooperation of SomArts, I don't quite know where we'd be doing something this big. And they're a wonderful and generous organization. And they're like that partially because of their executive director who passed away last year, Jack. And Jack Davis, one of the most just overwhelmingly supportive people in the arts that there has ever been. So let's give a little round of applause to keep it haunted.